Thank you for joining us today. As you know, we have an excellent debate conversation with Stuart Dodds. Stuart Dodds is, I would say, one of the specialists and experts on pricing. Stuart is based in London. He is the founder and director of Positive Pricing, a consultancy firm which is focused basically in working with law firms in precisely introduce changes that has to be introduced in order to meet with the expectations of the clients through analysis of the new methods that exist in order to price the services of the law firm. Bert has an excellent experience on this particular subject. He was the director of pricing of one of the global law firms and has a great knowledge of the legal sector, and is a well-known, I would say, a speaker at programs, not just in the UK, in the US, in Latin America, through the programs that we have organized with LexLatin and as well in Asia. Today, and I want to invite all of you to use the Q&A to raise any questions that you may have. Feel confident to raise your question in English and or in Spanish. I think that it is of paramount importance to those that are taking part today in our debate to understand why pricing is so important nowadays. We have heard quite a lot about that general counsels in-house want more for less. Have you analyzed why they are asking more for less? We have heard as well that a large number of law firms continue pricing their services based on the hourly rate. Why law firms continue and do not introduce different alternatives in order to price their services. We know that nowadays clients want to receive from their outside counsel more added value. Are you clear? Have you understand how you can price the added value that you offer to your clients? Well, all these different subjects will be discussed this morning with Stuart, and I want to emphasize that all these subjects are part of the executive programs that we have and that we are presenting on November 28 and 29, and we look forward to have a good number of you attending this particular program. So, Stuart, welcome, and I would like to start talking to you about cost predictability. Clients want to have transparency, want to have predictability on the cost of the legal services, and it seems that one of the answers to this concern is alternative fee arrangements.
Thank you, Fernando. And first of all, good morning to everybody. Thank you for taking time to attend this this debate today. I feel a little bit like an interviewee in a job interview. I'm not quite sure what Fernando's going to ask me, but hopefully I'll be able to answer the questions appropriately for you all. So thank you for taking time. But back to the question, I think cost predictability is really, really important, both for us as law firms, but also for our clients. And you know, this sort of comes back to the broader theme about when we're engaging with our clients about managing their expectations. It's about managing that better client law firm experience. And, you know, one way of doing that obviously is using fixed fees. But I think sometimes we need to take a step back and think, well, actually, what is the client asking us for that predictability on? You know, what are they? Is it because they want to compare us versus somebody else? Is it because they want to understand what the budget is that they need to do this piece of work? Is it because they want to understand what the business case is for doing this piece of work? Because that might inform the budget, it might increase it. It might reduce it based on what the opportunities are. And one of the challenges, I think, is a low fixed fees are a good way of doing this, and I'm going to come back to that in a second. We've got to think through, well, why do clients look for fixed fees? And in some respects, in the conversations that I've had with other law firms, that I've had with clients, it's sometimes because the client themselves don't feel that we're acting accountably. So, often hourly rates are an appropriate fee mechanism to be working with our clients, where we maybe have a limited understanding about how the matter will pursue, or where it's very, very urgent. And sometimes there's a frustration that's in the client relationship because we're not keeping the client updated. We're not being held accountable to the estimates that we gave originally. But I think moving towards alternative fee models is a better way of having that conversation. Clients don't want to worry about what the input is to a matter as much as what does that allow them to do? What risks does that allow them to mitigate? What opportunities does that allow them to realize? And having that greater cost certainty as a fixed fee, or maybe fixed fee by different stages of work, is really, really important. But it comes down to actually us acting accountably when we have that conversation with the client from the proposal stage onwards, because that's where we set the expectation. It's around having ongoing communication with the client as we're delivering the matter. And it's about delivering strong project management and demonstrating that, so the client knows that we're only spending their money where we need to spend the money, because that's what gives them that comfort. And that's what also improves that broader client experience.
That's absolutely correct. Now, in your experience working with law firms, do you have the data? Do you have the information to say, I mean, X percentage of I would say, law firms with whom I work, in their day-to-day pricing, they are introducing alternative fee arrangements? What is your opinion on that? What is the percentage of introducing these new tendencies, which is more than new? I mean, it's something that we have been discussing for a couple of years or more.
Indeed. Well, I mean, I think one of the other things, if I sort of broaden it out a little bit, luckily I work with many, many law firms across the globe, but I also work with a number of other professional service firms, ones that we will all be familiar with, the big brand names that we all know and love. And all professional service firms are struggling with what's the right fee approach and in what circumstance. And what certainly I'm saying is that many more people are trying to move towards either more cost predictable fee mechanisms, such as fixed fees, or also those that share or more equally balance the risk and reward for conducting a certain project. So those that are more outcome based. You may recognize the phrase value-based fees. So maybe we're putting some fees at risk based on the project going well, or maybe we have to discount going less well. So many firms are now beginning to try and work out, well, where and for what clients and for what practice areas should they start to move into these different types of fee mechanisms. Now, I'm of a view that the hourly rate, the time and materials process, will still have a place in some parts of the work that all the firms represented here do today. Right. But what it shouldn't be is it shouldn't be the default mechanism. It should be the one that you say, well, we can't do something that is more aligned to the risk. We can't do something that's more aligned to the cost. Therefore, in this situation, we may want to resort to using an hourly rate process. I think it's switching the conversation. It's making it more, let's think about how we can give that greater certainty and predictability. And that means we need information. I know you're going to come on to this, I think, in other questions, but actually we need to understand, well, what does it cost for us to deliver this type of work for the client? We need to understand, what does this mean for the client? What does this help the client do? We need to recognize how we maybe incorporate technology into delivering those services. And those all have an impact on what that eventual price will be.
Absolutely. And this is related to one of the points that I raised in my introduction, the value alignment. I mean, an answer to this concern is value-based pricing. Now, we know that, as I said in the introduction, clients want more and more that their outside counsel deliver added value. Okay, they want them to leave the lawyering. They want them to have a clear understanding on the sector in which they are conducting their business, and they want them to understand the business of the client. And then that's why they ask for added value. I might be wrong, but when we heard that clients want more for less, we're talking about a different sort of services that we will come back to that. But when the client receives added value and is well pricing, the price is not the concern, by all means. And they have a clear understanding that they have to pay that particular price. Now, here, in my opinion, there is a problem, which is the lack, I would say, of communication between the outside counsel and the client. When they receive a mandate, very few firms invest time to have a clear understanding which are the expectations of the client of the service that they are requesting, in order precisely to define which is the added value that the clients want to receive. I would like to hear and that you share with all the participants your experience of this, because sometimes it is considered a rather complex or difficult to define that particular added value.
Yeah, it's a great question, Fernando. And as you know, because we've spoken many times, one of the things that we believe is that the pricing that we provide our clients has to be fair to our client. That's the first thing that we recognize. But it also has to be fair to you as the practicing lawyer or the firm that you represent. You're not going to do something that doesn't give you that commensurate value to you. And good pricing is around two key things. It's around, from our law firm's perspective, us improving our financial position so that today we are slightly better off than we were yesterday, and tomorrow we are hopefully slightly better off than we are today. But it's also about building and developing and strengthening the right type of client relationships. It's not only about more money, it's about the right type of money in the right way. But to do that, we have to understand what is of value to our clients. That means we need to be having that communication. And that means that we need to understand, well, what do our clients see being of value to them? What's their objectives? What are the challenges that they're facing? I'll come on to some of this in a second. But we also need to recognize how we help support those clients to realize that value. So what role do we have in that conversation? Because then we can communicate that to our clients. And that means that we can also justify our fee more comfortably and confidently to our clients. Because if we're not competing on value, or the added value, as you said a few moments ago, the only thing we can compete on is price. And there will always be somebody lower, cheaper, maybe not as strong as we are, who will be cheaper than we are. And that's not what we're trying to do with this client situation. So what we really need to do is have the conversation with the client, say, well, what's at stake for them? What's of most value for them? And certainly in the work that we've done, and I know that you've done some of this as well, is we add value to clients in a number of different ways. We add value to the client organization, the client entity, the firm that we are working for. And we can help them do things to help improve their situation. So, for example, improve their revenues, improve their cash flow, enhance their reputation. And we also help them do things that help them avoid or mitigate risks and cost, or potentially help decrease costs within their organization. But we also help the individuals that we work with in how we engage and how we understand what's important to them, and how we bring that business context to the conversation, how we understand how they fit into their own organization. And we make their life easier. We make them look good. And we do that through, again, having a good understanding about what's important to those individuals. But we also add value by being better placed to help them than anybody else, than any other firm that they will consider. And that comes down to a number of things. It comes down to the expertise that we have within our respective firms. It comes down to the relationships that we have with the client individuals, but also maybe the broader network, maybe the regulators in certain jurisdictions. And it comes down to our approach to pricing. And I think we need to just take a step back. If I can, I came from a management consulting background years ago, and in a management consulting, before you would do your proposal, you think through, well, what are we helping the client do? What quantifiable result will the client get as a result of our advice? And management consultants today will do that. They'll put it on the dollars and cents and all the different the granular details. I'm not necessarily asking you to think about that today on this webinar, this debate, but what it is important is to understand how you help improve the client's situation, how the way that you're delivering your services help them reduce cost, how it helps them realize opportunities, because that is where the conversation needs to focus on. And once we understand what's at stake for our clients, then the client sees our fee in the right context. In pricing, our price is always relative to something. It's either relative to what the client paid me yesterday, it's relative to what somebody else will charge the client, but ideally we want to shape that conversation to be, it's relative to what's at stake, what's of value to that client. And if we can put a number on that, we can articulate that to the client and communicate that to the client, that helps differentiate us and makes us a much better provider for them because they understand what they get for using your firm and your services.
Thank you for the answer. And from your answer, I took a few points that I would like to come back. You mentioned something that if you do not define any strategy for pricing, then you go through the traditional, let's say, mechanism, which is reduce price, okay? And very often within particular jurisdictions, we have the war of pricing, okay? But one of the things is that if this is the, let's say, the criteria followed by the firm, or that the formula followed by the firm, my experience is that once you reduce your costs, it will be very difficult to increase them again, okay? Because you already gave to your client a concession. What do you think about that?
I completely agree. In pricing terminology, it's called the reference price. So if I'm going to use Fernando, use my foil, if I may. If I normally charge you $100 for delivering a service, and then I reduce that to be $90 for delivering the same service, I will not be able to get back to $100 again, because $90 is now your new reference price. If it's exactly the same thing, I'm not going to pay you more than I paid you last time. So I think we've got to be very, very careful how we choose to. I don't like the word discount. I prefer the word investment, because you're investing your firm's profitability. You're investing your time in the relationship. One of the things here is actually working out, well, where should we be investing and why are we looking to do that? Because as you say, there will always be somebody cheaper. And one of the things that we find being very, very effective, and we see a number of leading law firms within the region and others outside of the region doing, is beginning to provide the clients options. If you've only got $50, this is what we can give you. But if you have $80, we can give you a little bit more. And if you have $100, we can give you even more. And then you're saying to the client, what's most important to you? Would you rather focus on the $50 offering or the $100 offering? Because that changes the client conversation. You're now talking about what's of most value to the client, what it allows them to do. And we need to be willing to have that conversation.
Absolutely. I fully agree with you. And we have a comment, which is at the same time a question from Carla Lozano, and I will return to that. Because other point that I outlined out of your reply is, nowadays legal operations is a concept that it started within the legal departments, okay? In order to reconfigure process, in order to innovate, in order to be more effective, and because the general counsel and the team wants to be involved in the strategy decisions of the company, and not just to be the gatekeepers, okay? And controlling and managing the contracts and the relations with the outside councils and the different service providers, etc. In my opinion, the general counsels, based on what the pressure, let's call pressure, that they are receiving from the management board of the corporation asking to be more effective, they are turning around and they are expecting exactly the same from their outside counsel. They want them, as I said at the introduction, that they understand the industry, that they understand their business, and that they be part of the making decision process for them to bring to the management board. I would like to hear, based on your experience, because legal operations is something that started very strongly in the Anglo-Saxon countries, let's say the US and the UK and Australia. So I would like very much to hear your comment.
Well, my guilty secret is I used to be a procurement consultant, and that's actually one of the in some respects, a foundation for a lot of what legal operations begin to do. Obviously, legal operations is much broader. It's more about managing the law department within an organization. But also a number of the clients that you may be coming across, those of you on the call, will be facing maybe legal procurement departments where there maybe isn't as full of a legal operations department. And Fernando, when you were chatting, I was remembering a survey, and it was done in 2011. So it was a long, long time ago. Probably too long ago for all of us. And it was called General Counsel Vague About Value. And one of the challenges that I think we need to recognize is that often the clients that we're working with are also struggling to work out, well, what's their added value? You know, those in law departments are often seen as a cost center within their organization, because they're trying to mitigate risk, but actually they can help generate a lot of value through either that risk mitigation, through the revenue from the work that they do, and through the relationships and partnerships that they have with their outside counsel. So, you know, much as we're struggling to work out how do we add value to our clients, sometimes the client themselves is struggling to work out, well, how do they add value to their organization? And we can have that conversation with them to do it, because actually clients are not necessarily wanting more for less. I think the first thing for those things that are relatively straightforward, yes, they want to see efficiencies, and they should. If I think back to maybe 2008, 2009, a lot of clients that people were working with were trying to reduce their costs of producing whatever it is that they produce, whether they're a financial institution, whether they're a pharmaceutical, whether they're a small shop. But they weren't seeing their outside counsel taking that same diligence to how they delivered their services. And that's what I think they're looking for. They're saying, look, we're investing in how we get better. How are you able to demonstrate to us as your client that you're also becoming much more effective and efficient in how you deliver your processes? And how can we as a client benefit from that either technology or the process improvement that you're putting in place, so that we're not wasting money, that we're getting good value for money. But also the key thing here is clients will be willing to pay more if they get a lot more back. So it's not that they're just trying to cut costs. They're saying, help us use our money appropriately and wisely. And actually, if I spend a little bit more to get a lot more back, I'm happy to do that. But I just need to understand, what does that look like? So again, if we think about it from a law department's perspective or a legal operations perspective, somebody who's managing legal operations is looking at 3 buckets of spend. They're looking at their internal spend for their own law department and trying to manage that appropriately and make sure that their teams are doing the appropriate activities to support their business. They're looking at their outside counsel spend. So they're going to say, well, who do we use on certain types of matters or transactions because of their experience, because of the relationship that we have? And who should we be considering to help maybe manage the costs of that for less complex matters? But they're also managing the legal outcomes to their organization. You know, what happens if we win that big litigation? What happens if we lose that big litigation? So we need to be encouraging the client to look at it in a much more broad context, to say, here are ways that we can engage and add value to you. It may not make sense for us to be doing all your legal work because we may be too expensive for some of the things that are more commoditized and more routine. But actually, if you focus our efforts in the right way, we can help you mitigate significant losses or get significant awards. And it's that dialogue, that collaboration that underpins good pricing. I've often said in different contexts, good pricing comes down to 3 things: confidence in the value that we add to our clients and how we deliver that value. It's around having good communication internally within our organization, our own firm, to make sure we're all aligned, but also regular communication with our clients. It's about managing their expectations. And the third thing is about being collaborative with our clients. You know, if there's a better way to do something to align our commercial models, back to your fixed fee example, or to support certain parts of their business, that's what we should be open to in having that conversation.
Absolutely. And I will come back to a couple of the issues that you mentioned, but I want to raise the question that Carla presented, which is I believe that this conversation with the client allow us to offer not just one price, but maybe a couple or three pricing options that could make the client feel, understand, and in control of the situation, because he's going to choose the better option. And we are going to be in a better negotiation position. Are you in agreement with this?
I am, and actually, I think the number 3 is a good number, and I'll tell you why in a moment. But actually, I there's a story that I sometimes share when I'm delivering some training to other organizations, and it's of a partner that I used to work for a few years ago. She still is very, very, very good, but she hadn't been very successful for maybe the last 4 of her client opportunities. Not because she didn't know the client, not because she wasn't good at what she did, but because when she'd given the client the solution, it was the perfect solution for what she thought they needed to do. And the problem is, if you give one price, you give the client an ultimatum. You're saying, choose me or don't choose me. You're not giving them anywhere to move to. And when they don't choose us, we think it's because our price was wrong. If you provide the client with options, much as Carla was saying, you're changing the conversation. We think you want option 1 because this is what we think aligns best to what you're doing. But if you provide the other options, it does a number of things. Firstly, it allows the client to focus on what's of most value to them, because they're thinking through, well, what do I want to get from this investment that they're making? And does this achieve that? The other thing that it helps you do, certainly if it's a competitive situation, is it begins to level the playing field. There's a quote, you may need to translate this into Spanish for me, Fernando, but there's a quote or phrase in English to make it an apples for apples comparison. So I'm comparing the same things. I think that hopefully does translate.
It's very similar in Spanish. Comparar peras con peras, no peras con manzanas. You compare apple with apple, and you don't compare apple with pears. Okay.
Complete. That's what I thought you said, but I just wanted to check. And I think what it does is it also makes then the client think through, well, actually, am I being offered the same thing? Is it of equivalent value? And then who do I want to work for? Who's the firm that I have the good relationship with, that I have the comfort with, that I have the good chemistry with, that also has the expertise? Because clients don't choose on cheapest price. A client will choose who's got the expertise and can do the job. Who do I like to work with and understands what I do? And then, is the price fair? They're not going to go, who's cheapest, and then have they got the skills, and then do I like working with them? It doesn't work that way around. And we often need to remember that and have that confidence when we're engaging in that conversation. And back to Carla's point, 3 options are best, because you're not giving the client too many things to choose from. If you give the client 4 or more options, it's like a menu in a fast food restaurant. There's too many things, and people therefore get confused, and then they don't make a decision. But 3 is a nice number. So thank you for the question.
Excellent. Going back to one of your comments, which I think is of paramount importance in all this process of defining and fixing the pricing, you said good conversation, internal and external. And here we come to the same comment that Carla did. I mean, when you're going to present to your client 3 different options, I mean, it is essential that whoever is the responsible for drafting these options to have had the opportunity to discuss internally what is the scope of the service, what are all the elements involved in the service, how important is the service for the client, not just in value, but also vis-a-vis the business of the company. So the firm can build that particular set of alternatives to present to the client. But on the other hand, before going, in my opinion, before going into that process internally, they had to discuss with the client to understand clearly which are the expectations, what he is expecting from the firm. And nowadays that we are talking more and more about collaboration within the law firms, to break the silos that traditionally operate in law firms, and you bring different professionals to work together to deliver the service. I think that your comment, it is extremely important. So let's keep moving. There is one other point that I want to bring to the discussion, which is obviously the integration of technology and its impact on pricing. Okay, and here, as I was as well mentioning at the opening of my opening remarks, is, in my opinion, the more for less has a very close relation on the automatization of services by the law firms. What is your opinion?
I think as one of the things that is the hot topic in many pricing functions across the globe, regardless of location, is how to best address pricing legal technology. And legal technology as a concept is actually pretty broad. It's not just some of the Gen AI tools or the generative AI tools that we hear about, like Harvey and ChatGPT. It's also things like our legal research databases. It's around how we present the information. It's around the e-discovery software that maybe we've used in the past, or maybe some of the project management software that some of you may be using. So legal technology as a concept is actually pretty broad. And one of the challenges here is that I think there's a lot of hype within the market. I was doing something recently and we worked out that there were over 7,500 companies that are offering legal technology solutions in the market. And that's a heck of a lot. And there's different ways to look at what they do. Is it search and find? Is it, are they workflow tools? You know, there's a range of different things. But that's a lot of different things. And actually a lot of them are making, and often sometimes cases, very good promises, but not sure that they're being realized yet in terms of the opportunity. But this is setting an expectation within both our clients and also within the law firms themselves about what these tools can do. Now, many of those tools are very, very good. Some will continue to get even better. But the problem is that there's an expectation that adopting these tools is A, relatively straightforward, which is not the case. And secondly, that adopting these tools will lead to significant cost reductions. Many of the tools that we hear about, particularly those that are maybe more towards the generative AI space or the workflow space, are making claims that they will save time, reduce time by 40, 50%. And that's quite a big claim to be making. Now, the challenge from us from a pricing perspective, so come back to the sort of theme of the question, is that we need to think about, well, what are these tools actually doing? Because we use these tools in different ways throughout how we deliver a matter. If I'm delivering an M&A transaction, I may use a tool like Kira to help do the contract management element of it. I may be using a project management tool. I may be using some research database. I'm using a number of different tools at different stages of that transaction that I need to think about, how do I integrate it? But often many of these tools are focusing on the activities that are things like how we do the drafting, how we review the processes. And that actually is a bigger issue for many firms, because the activities that these tools are typically supporting are those activities that are being typically done by those who are more junior within a firm. So not the partners, but those senior associates and associates. And as I'm sure everybody on this call knows, the engine of profitability within a law firm is typically the senior associates and the associates. Now, if we're adopting tools that A, cost money to implement, B, take revenue away from the firm, how do we balance that challenge? And I think one of the things that many firms are now beginning to think about is where they're making investments in technology, where should those investments be being made, to which clients should those investments being made, and how can they proactively manage expectations about what this will do to the underlying firm profitability and revenues of the firm, so they can manage that more effectively. So I'll give you a very simple example. There's a tool, I won't mention the tool's name because that's not as relevant, that can do something in 15 minutes that would normally take between 10 and 15 hours. So they can do it in almost a 60th, if my maths is right, either a 60th of the time or even more than that. Now, a client isn't going to pay a 60th of the original fee, because there's the cost of the software, there's the cost of the training, there's the cost of the maintenance, there's the fact that you need to check the results as well, because not all these things are client ready in terms of the information. So the challenge here is being very, very thoughtful about where you're going to invest and how you're going to do it, and take that step back from a commercial perspective to think through, and what does this mean for us, and how do we manage the expectations internally, and how do we make sure we manage our investments externally and have the right conversations with our clients? Because it may be quicker, but it might not be better, and it might not be client ready. And I think we've got to sometimes take away ourselves a little bit from the hype and what's going on.
I fully agree, and here I just want to comment something which all of those taking part in this debate conversation, I mean, I think have clear, which is more and more competition. I mean, law firms are facing more and more competition in their corresponding jurisdictions. Before, it was just local competition, but now your competitors are local, are regional, are international, and now we have as well the alternate service providers. And here I want to mention, just to keep raising awareness to the law firms, that in the large number, and I would like to have your opinion, of the alternate legal service providers, their business model is very much based on technology. So they are focusing on services that law firms are not yet gone through the process of automatization. So they can compete on pricing very, very strongly, and it is where they are developing their business. It is clear that, and you read, and I am sure that you are very much aware that, okay, alternative legal service providers are not in the high end of the service. Okay, are not in the high end of the service, but they are taking away from you a good volume of business that you could be, as you explained, very good if you would have invest in technology and in automatization and in reduce, and not having attorneys doing a job that can be do and processed by a system. I would like to have your comment on that.
I think it's a great observation. It's certainly something that I'm seeing in some of the other regions and markets that I'm working with as well. And you know, I come back to something that some of you may know of, a legal thinker called Richard Susskind. And Richard Susskind a few years ago came out with a process about thinking through what are the law firm services that are provided by a firm to their clients. And he had sort of 5 gradations of it. But at one end, there were things that were commoditized. And there was, at the far end of the scale, there were things that were very bespoke or very tailored to that specific client situation. And what we are finding is, obviously, a lot of these firms, such as the alternate legal service providers, are able to do things that are much more routine, much more predictable, very, very efficiently. And that's where they've invested a lot of expertise and a lot of investment in technology. And that makes sense. That's their sweet spot. They can do other things, but that's what they're really, really good at. And I think one of the observations that I've got from the comment that you made, Fernando, is actually we as law firms shouldn't be complacent, because anywhere within a transaction, whether it be a litigation matter, whether it be an M&A matter, whether it be a capital markets matter, there are bits of that transaction or that matter that are very, very specific, very, very targeted, where they need the expertise. So if I think about a litigation matter, you know, the advocacy, the strategy for the trial, that's where you need the experience. That's the value that you as firms will be bringing. But there'll be some activities as part of that process that can be relatively commoditized or routine. And you need to be thinking through, how will you deliver those services more cost effectively and with more certainty, because it's those types of services that those alternate legal service providers are trying to target. Similarly, in an M&A transaction, again, if I think about some of the activities that happen there, you know, document management, that's pretty easy to do. That can be done by anybody. But when it comes to the negotiation of the documents, again, when it comes to the relationships with the regulators, that's where you as a law firm are adding significant value. And those are the things that you need to protect and think about, what are the things that we can automate and improve either using a firm, maybe it is an alternate legal service provider, maybe you're partnering with them as one of your options, back to Carla's options, or maybe you've got your own solution. But we need to think about where within the life cycle of that matter can we get better? Where does technology support it, and where do we add the most value? Because that's the bit the clients want to pay for. It's the smarts that you provide.
Absolutely. I fully agree with your comments, and we have a couple of questions that I would like to raise. One says, how would the pricing criteria change depending on the type of procedure or area of practice? Is something that you were referring indirectly now. Like, how can this apply on criminal law?
I think, again, in any type of matter, that there are things that are more routine, more predictable, easier to do, and they're going to be under much more price pressure. That's where we need to either work out how we can deliver those services more effectively, or choose not to deliver those services, let somebody else who can do it more effectively focus on that area. But there are similarly, there are things that are very, very complex, that you, based on the skills and expertise of your firms, are best placed to do. You understand the market, you understand the client, you understand the jurisdiction. And those are the things that I think we just need to have people making much more of a thoughtful assessment about, well, what are we really good at? Where do we add value to our clients? And for those services, you can price something much more highly. It's like less price sensitive. We still want the price to be fair. You want it to be relative to the outcome to the client. But those services that are a little bit more cost competitive, where there's many more providers in the market that are much more predictable, I think I'm certainly seeing some of my clients beginning to assess, is that still somewhere that we need to be servicing within the market? And we might want to do it for some clients, not all clients, because you don't really want to be competing on price, because if you're competing on price, you're only going to go one way, and that's at a lower price and lower price. You want to be finding out what's your differentiator, what makes you and your firms you, because that's what the clients pay for. And often one way of trying to do that, because I appreciate can be quite complex, is think about your current biggest client and think about, if you stop working with them today, what they would miss most about you, because for that client, that's your differentiator. It could be the fact you just keep in contact with them every day. It could be a whole range of different things, but we need to find what makes you in the eyes of your client, because that's what they value.
Absolutely, and the answer that you gave to this question, which was an anonymous question, applies to any boutique specialized in any particular area of practice, whether it's criminal, labor, tax, you name it. We have from Gabriel Villavicencio a question that says, in relation to the idea of presenting fee proposals with 3 different options, how can we ensure that the document contained in this proposal is not lengthy and confusing for the clients?
I think that's a great point, because actually what makes a good proposal is one which very clearly highlights what's at stake for the client. This is what we understand you as a client are looking to do. This is how we propose to address that challenge. This is our strategy for addressing the issue. But what we want to do is we want to actually change the conversation from the client saying, do I use your firm, to how do I best use your firm? And using options is a really great way of doing that. So I think we need to make sure that when we're communicating that in a proposal, back to the question, we don't want it to be too lengthy, but we want to be very clear. Here are 3 different ways we can approach it. These are the differences between the 3 ways. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Client, what is your preferred option? We should make a recommendation, but it allows us to have the conversation. And if we have the conversation, we can then shape something that is even of greater value to our end client as well.
Now, we have another question from Boris. It says, in terms of pricing, how do you recommend to harmonize the pricing of legal work, be at a fixed legal fee or a service to an hourly rate, especially when you can start some legal work, but the nature of the work through unforeseeable or uncontrollable circumstances prolongs itself in time and in cost, be it fixed or rated as the manage of expectations of the client, and even the attrition of the legal process to them, especially when it comes to escape the initial expectations at the start.
I think it's a great question, and I'm going to try and give your voice a little bit of a rest. So I'm going to answer this a couple of ways. I think the first thing is to recognize that the pricing approach that we take at the beginning of the matter may not be the pricing approach that we take all the way through a matter. And that's, again, one of the things that will differentiate your firms to other firms. It's thinking about, well, what's of most value to the client? So let me, again, give a simple illustration. I'll do M&A. Just, I know that not everybody's an M&A lawyer, but if I use that as an example, when a client is thinking about making an acquisition, they're going to go through due diligence. They're not sure if they're going to go ahead or not. So they don't want to spend lots and lots of money doing this. They want to spend just the right amount of money for them to find out, is this a good opportunity or is this a bad opportunity? So therefore, they may want to do something on a fixed fee where there's a known cost, or they may want to do it on a cap fee. So they're capping how much they will spend to test this out. But when they start to agree to go ahead with the acquisition, when they start preparing the documents, when they start negotiating the documents, that, from the client's perspective, is where all the value is being created. It's not, do I go ahead with this firm or not? It's actually, how do I structure the deal? How do I make sure that we're capturing lots of value? And in that situation, a client may be much more willing to align their commercial outcomes and objectives to your commercial outcomes and objectives. So you may want to be doing this on a contingent basis, a success basis. But then the transaction hopefully goes ahead successfully. And then we need to do the closing of that transaction. Now, it's important from a compliance perspective, but actually from a client value perspective, it really has no other value, or not much value. I don't want to say no other value. It doesn't have a significant value. So again, a client is not willing to spend as much to do that. They want much more certainty around cost. So they may want to do something on a blended rate basis, or again, a fixed fee basis, because they know that what needs to happen. So thinking through where the value of the transaction is generated and how do our commercial models align to that is really, really important. If I take another example, if I take, for example, maybe a litigation matter. Litigation matters, as we know, can sometimes be extremely lengthy over a number of years. And it can be very difficult for us to give the client a precise number at the beginning of that matter, because things change. We find out more information as that matter goes ahead. So what can be really helpful from a pricing perspective is two things. One is we may want to consider stage pricing. So we price for what we know, what we've agreed with the client. So to do this first phase of the matter is going to cost X. We know that as we go into the second phase of the matter, it could be, $100, it could be $50, depending on what happens. So we're managing the expectations at that stage, but we're using different pricing approaches as we go through. It's about the point that, Fernando, you talked about, the communication and the collaboration. The other thing that we may want to do is we may say, well, actually, we can price for what we know, but we appreciate that sometimes things come up that we haven't anticipated. So you can use a range of different models. You may do a fixed price for a piece of work. If I take maybe e-discovery, think about the number of documents that you're reviewing. But you say maybe for the first 100 documents, it's going to be $100. But everything above that, we will charge you at a discounted hourly rate. Again, you're giving yourself a safety valve, but what you're doing is you're having a conversation with the client about what the most appropriate pricing mechanism is, rather than trying to take, ultimately what you're trying to do in any pricing conversation is provide the client with greater cost certainty, but you're also wanting to manage commercial risk to you and your firm. And it's thinking, well, what are the pricing approaches that you can adopt to help influence that?
Your last comment about communication is close related to another question that Gabriel Villavicencio has about the presentation of 3 different offers. It says, following up my previous question, the proposal with 3 options should be then presented as an invitation to have a conversation.
Completely.
Absolutely. The answer is yes, because then, in my opinion, as Stuart mentioned when answered the question, you involve the client in the taking of the decision. And he took the decision based on what he considered is the best proposal for their interest.
Yeah.
So I think.
If I go back to my story where I shared the story about the partner who'd not won the last 4 of the proposals, actually what they did was they then started to provide 3 options. And interestingly, they won 4 out of the next 5 proposals. Now, 2 of them, the client could clearly see I wanted option 1 or option 2 or option 3. It was very, very clear to the client what they wanted. But back to Gabriella's point, for two of them, the client said, well, I want a little bit of option one and want a little bit of option two. And they continued the conversation. And remember, if they're having the conversation with you and your firm, they're not having the conversation with anybody else. You've changed the pricing conversation. Not to, do I use your firm, but how do I best use your firm? And that's where ultimately we would want to be.
And that's very important, because then it is clear that the firm is controlling the conversation with the client, and the client is not shopping around. Is concentrated in that. We are going into our last question, because this has been extremely interesting. We are close to the hour. And this question, for me, is extremely important, which is the impact of data analysis for pricing strategies. I think the industry, the legal industry, generates a lot of data, okay? But we know, at least in our region, there is not still a culture to analyze the data that we produce. We are right now talking more and more about KPIs and the importance of the KPIs. And I think that very often the firms have the answer to many of the questions that they have in presenting a proposal to their clients on new business, if they go back and start analyzing the data that they have based on previous similar cases. But I would like very much to hear your opinion about this particular point.
I'm going to sort of answer it two different ways if I can. I think the first thing is recognizing it's a theme that, it's certainly in conversations I've had with many of my clients, is very, very important. You know, law firms sit on a lot of data, but the challenge here is to take the data and make it into information, and then making that information into insight. So which are the right examples that we want to use? And I've heard a number of examples from clients who have said, well, we chose this as what we thought was what the matter was going to look like, but it was the wrong example to use. So a lot of firms are spending time refining the data to make sure they've got the right examples ready to hand, which I think is really important. So you will have lots of good information within your firms. I think the second thing, and this is maybe something that we're seeing more in certain jurisdictions, particularly the US, a little bit in the UK, not so much maybe elsewhere, is the rise of business professionals within organizations that can sustain that type of role of data scientists, people who are actually being asked to actively go in and interrogate the data to find out the trends and the themes about maybe certain types of matter types or client types or jurisdictions. Again, it's back to this point though, that we sit on a lot of information within law firms, but a lot of it is sometimes meaningless unless we start to structure it the right way. So actually think about how do we want to structure it at the micro and the macro level, how we begin to capture our time entries or our narratives, for example, using phases and tasks, so that when we take the right examples, we know what we're using. But using historic information and using that as a template for conversations with new clients or existing clients is really, really important. And it's something that we're seeing many, many firms investing a lot of time and energy into.
Excellent. A final question from Daniel Cudi. Is there a good ratio for a success fee and work done to be taken into account for a proposal?
That's a really good question. And I think I'm going to say it's very matter specific. I think that's it. I've seen a range of different mechanisms. Sometimes in litigation, it could be 2 times, 3 times the fee. It could be a proportion of the award. But I'm going to go back to the same comment I made really early on in the conversation. The pricing has to be fair to the client. It has to be fair to the firm. But the other thing that I would maybe suggest is you want to make sure that whatever fee you charge, if it was put in front of your national newspaper the next day, you would feel comfortable to stand behind and say, yes, we actually did deliver that value. So that's always quite a good test, you know, the publicity test.
Excellent. Before finalizing, 2, I would say, comments. Number 1, we have published in the chat the the link for the program that will be presented by LexLatin in association with Positive Pricing with Stuart and his partner Colin, and that is starting on November 28th. We invite you to review the program. We have restructured the program based on the recommendation given by Stuart and Colin that will really offer, quote, an added value to all of you to manage pricing. So we invite you, the cost, I would say, is very competitive. And nevertheless, if you need some support in paying the program, the cost of the program in more than one installment, please contact through WhatsApp following the information given in the landing page. And also, we would like to invite you to reply the survey that we are publishing now in order to evaluate this particular program, this particular debate with Stuart this morning. And before closing, I would like to invite Stuart to give us his final remarks, his final recommendation.
Okay, firstly, before we close, thank you everybody for taking time out your morning, and thank you for the questions that came through. Very much appreciated. Kept me on my toes. I think the one thing that I'm going to sort of leave with is to say, make sure you are confident in what you deliver your clients. We are often very, very humble. Humble confidence is good, but remember the value you add to your clients and price accordingly. And with that, Fernando, back to you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I want to invite all those still connected to answer this particular survey. It will help us very much to tailor future programs to evaluate this particular debate. And once again, I want to emphasize the invitation for many of you to be part of the program, to be one of the participants of the program. I think that nowadays, without any doubt, in my opinion, pricing plays one of the most important, I would say, roles in the business development of any particular firm. As I said at the beginning of the presentation, there are many factors impacting the sector of legal services, and we can list it. But in my opinion, factor number one is competition. How you differentiate from your competitors. And I think that one very important tool to differentiate from your competitors is mastering the pricing of your services. So you are more than welcome. We hope to have many of you in this particular program. You will not be disappointed. And those that are still responding to the survey, you can continue. And once again, it was a pleasure, Stuart, to have this conversation with you. And thank you very much to all those that participate this morning and join us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Always a pleasure. Thank you, Fernando. Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.